From USMB, this is the Christian Leader Podcast.
Let's always go into it assuming the positive about our kids, that they really deeply want to do the very best that they can. And that really becomes a task for us as the adults in the room to figure out what it is that gets them excited about the thing that we're putting before them to do.
Well, that was a little different. So let me be the first to welcome you to the very first episode of the USMB Christian Leader Podcast. I am still Matt Ersman, and I'm still your host. But for those of you who have joined us for the past over 150 episodes of Lead Pods, we decided it was time to shake things up a little bit. So here is what's going on. If you've been in USMB circles for a while now, you likely know and likely love the Christian Leader magazine, which is our denominational magazine for the U.S. Mennonite Brethren Conference of Churches. You may have heard that the Christian Leader magazine is going through a redesign process. They're kind of switching some things up on the magazine end of things. And we decided after 6 years, it's probably time to shake things up for the podcast as well. So Lead Pods is no more. We are now the Christian Leader Podcast. And honestly, I'm so excited about it. There's a lot of really great things that this allows us to do. So first of all, I think it's just a great name. I think it might allow us to reach some new audiences who might be searching on the various podcast platforms. But in this kind of new season of USMB, it also allows us to be really intentional about working together. I think you will see a lot of episodes that have tie-in with articles or features from the magazine and vice versa. It'll allow us to go a little bit deeper and maybe share some interviews that we didn't have space to provide in the print magazine, and just lots of great ways for us to work together. But I will tell you that we're also kind of shifting the audience of this podcast just a little bit. We are definitely still unapologetically MB, and we are still definitely aiming to serve church leaders. But we're also expanding the table a little bit. We want this content to be helpful for you in whatever stage of life, whatever role you play. So I hope this is helpful if you're a parent, or if you're married, or if you're a student, or if you're in the workplace. We just want to come alongside you in your walk with Jesus, whatever stage you're in. So honestly, I'm really excited about this new season for the podcast. I think it's going to be really, really great. And I hope as you get used to it, I think you'll learn to enjoy it as well. So today on this first episode of the Christian Leader Podcast, it's actually a great example of what I was just talking about. In the brand new issue of the Christian Leader, which if you haven't gotten yet, you will shortly, there's a really great piece in there all about ADD, ADHD, neurodivergent, some of these terms that I'm sure you're at least kind of familiar with. Really helpful information for parents and for teachers and for church leaders who might be interacting with students or adults who have those various conditions and ways that we can better serve them. Really good information for all of us to know, honestly. And so today's episode is kind of a companion piece to the print piece that'll be in the magazine. I'm so honored to have Dr. David Stevens back with us, Mickey Pullman, and Crystal Nachtigall, and they've got great, really helpful things to share for all of us. I think we'll all learn a lot in today's episode. So with that, let's go ahead and kick off the inaugural episode of the Christian Leader Podcast. I'm so glad to have you with me here today. So as always, we'll still go ahead and take a break to hear from this week's sponsor, and then we'll get to a really important conversation that I think will really be helpful. So enjoy.
Great news for the Central Valley and beyond. Fresno Pacific University has received a transformational $10 million Lilly Endowment Grant to equip and support today's church leaders, especially co-vocational pastors serving our communities. This investment expands seminary training, launches new programs, and provides vital scholarships for ministry students. And when you give toward the Lilly Matching Grant, your gift is matched 3-to-1, multiplying your impact. Join us in strengthening the future of the church. Give today at fpu.edu/LSCG.
All right, friends. Well, today I'm excited to have a really great and important conversation. I'm glad we're diving into this. And so this is a little bit of an experiment. We've got 3 people with us today, all experts in a variety of fields, but all have a lot to do with the same topic. So this will be a little bit of a fun round robin conversation here today. But today we're talking about learning disabilities, ADD, ADHD, neurodivergence, and everything that's kind of in that same category and way. Since most people listening are church leaders, I'm sure we have some teachers and definitely some parents. This is just something that increasingly in our culture today, I think it's wise for all of us to know about these things and to know how to handle them in a variety of settings. And so really great, important conversation. And before I forget, there's also an article in the Christian Leader magazine with these same three contributing. So listeners, I encourage you to check that out. But let me just go around the horn here and introduce everybody before we go too far here. So Mickey, let me start with you. We're joined by Mickey Pullman. She's got some really great experience, hands-on practical experience working with kids every day. So, Mickey, I know you attend an MB church, but can you remind us what you do day to day and what that looks like in your practice?
Yes, so I'm a licensed professional counselor here in the state of South Dakota. I currently work with a population that ranges from 5 to 68 years old, and I kind of run the gamut of any and everything that comes my way.
Wow, that's a big range. Awesome. Well, Mickey, I'm excited to dive in with you. And then Crystal Nachtigall is in California, and you're at Bethany Church in Fresno. Is that right?
Yes, I am the kids pastor at Bethany Church Fresno, and I get to work with, I like to say, from the womb to sixth grade. Once they graduate out sixth grade, I've got 3 teens of my own at home. And then before this job, I was a classroom teacher.
Very cool. So you've got the parent, the teacher, and the pastor boxes all checked. So glad to have you with us, Crystal. And then Dr. David Stevens, you've been on the podcast before. It's been a little while, so I'm glad to have you back. And
It has been a while.
It has, yeah, but I'm excited to have you back. I really loved your first episode, so I'm glad to dive in with you again. So you're at Tabor, Dr. Stevens. Remind us what you do there, and I know you're in Texas today. Give us a little bit of background.
So I've been at Tabor. I'm in my 6th year now. And so, I designed and launched a program in neuroscience and trauma. And so the nice thing is it's fully online. So we get to live with your family here in Fort Worth, Texas, while I teach everything completely online. I just go back to campus 2 or 3 times a year. But it's been a great experience. It's been good for me. I love seeing what's going on in the lives of our students. And I'm actually really glad that we're having this conversation because it's something that's really close to my heart. Because, I don't just have ADHD. I am ADHD with a trauma background, and it actually is a huge part of my identity and who I am. And I've had to come to grips with that as an adult because it's not something that I grew out of. It's something that is my reality still. And I can't keep a calendar in my head. I can't keep track of time. I get distracted easily and have trouble getting back on task. But if I had $1 for every time my wife said, "Don't you teach in 10 minutes? Or aren't you supposed to be in a meeting right now?" So luckily, I found somebody that not only gets me, but helps me function in life because it's been a challenge my entire life. And on top of that, I had this funky circadian rhythm where I just don't start waking up till about 10 o'clock. I'm in a fog till about 10, and then I don't get tired till 10 p.m. So imagine what high school is like for kids like me, where we just first 3 periods are a wash. So I'm really glad we're having this conversation.
I am too. And let the record show you are on time, Dr. Stevens. You're doing great. You're awake.
We started at 11 a.m., so I was able to make it.
Well, you're doing great. So that's awesome. Well, I think I want to start, again, I mentioned this at the top, but ADD, ADHD, and neurodivergent, and there's kind of all these terms that are kind of in the culture right now. A lot of us, I think most people have a very general idea of what those things mean, but we may not know how they're different, how they're similar, how they overlap. And I mean, I have to confess, I think a lot of people also maybe kind of tiptoe. They don't want to accidentally offend someone or use the wrong term or use a term that's outdated and offend somebody. So can we just quickly, maybe those 3 terms, ADD, ADHD, and neurodivergent, how are they similar, different? What do all the letters stand for? Maybe Dr. Stevens, I'll start with you if you're all right. Can you just start with defining some of those things for us?
Funny how we use neurodivergent because we do kind of use it to encapsulate everything, but it doesn't capture trauma and the effects of the brain. And when we talk about attention deficit disorders, we're really talking about predominantly inattentive presentation, predominantly hyperactive impulsive presentation, or a combined presentation, which is actually what we talk about most in our program. I'll let one of the others talk more about neurodivergence.
Mickey, how about you? Can you talk about neurodivergence?
Sure. So I would add to the definition of neurodivergence that it's that all-encompassing kind of any way that your brain isn't that neurotypical, what we would expect model of thinking and processing and behaving. That also would include our spectrum disorders that we have typically referred to as autism and Asperger's. We tend to just refer to those as a spectrum disorder now more than anything. I agree with Dr. Stevens that we don't include trauma and the effects of trauma on the brain and attention and focus in those in those labels and that language very well. So I hope to have a much more nuanced conversation about how that impacts our being in general.
And I guess this can go to anybody. I know one thing I've heard from people, just kind of in culture in general, is that culture has changed. American culture has changed. Everything is so fast and attention driven, and everything is fighting for your attention. There's light, bright, shiny objects everywhere. So again, I'm on a tiptoe. I'm not trying to be offensive, but I think neurotypical kids have trouble with attention. Like I've heard from teachers that if your brain is 100% quote unquote normal, or you're gifted or whatever, you still have trouble paying attention in our kind of normal culture today. So can you talk about that? Like how do we even begin to know what is maybe medical and neurological and what's just kind of part of being alive right now? Can anybody kind of chime in on that?
Well, I'll just say I agree with you that I think things have changed so much in the last 10 years even that we could almost say that every kid in every classroom has attention issues. Anyone who teaches will tell you it's the hardest thing to deal with is just that whole classroom management aspect with so many kids that have trouble staying on task with anything for more than 5 minutes. But then we talk a lot about the fact that you add trauma to that, and those kids are in an environment that doesn't feel safe. It feels too structured, which makes it almost impossible for them to be there learning when they don't feel safe.
Yeah. And Mickey, maybe I'll ask you here, is one of the kind of dangers in that, I think, is if we start to say that if every kid has attention issues, then kind of no kid has attention issues. Right? I think the hard thing here is if we kind of overdo this, then the kids who might have like a neurological issue that really, they actually do need some extra help, we might kind of accidentally cheapen or weaken what they need, right? So again, you see students of a variety of ages every day. Can you help us understand a little bit about the kids who neurologically have these issues, how they might need it even more than a neurotypical kid?
Yes, absolutely. And so speaking from my profession and the work that I do, really what you're looking for when you start trying to make the distinction between what is our typical kids who are just overwhelmed and overstimulated because our lives are very busy, and what are our kiddos who are actually experiencing these medical challenges, is that we're looking for a lot of environmental factors. If it can be explained by environment, then we're going to do our best to explain it by environment. So if we look at it, if we have a parent in, we're talking to a parent or a teacher, and they're saying, we're just gone every night of the week. We catch each other coming and going. We have schedules on the wall, on the calendar, on the phones. We never know what we're doing. The kids are on the screens all the time. If we're hearing those sort of environmental cues, then we're going to talk about how do we simplify life in general and just make it more conducive to connection with our families at a slower pace of being. When we start hearing things that reference intensity and frequency and duration of sustained academic, behavioral, social problems, emotional difficulties, is when we're going to look more at maybe this is meeting diagnostic criteria. This is a kiddo who we're 170 days into school. They haven't managed to complete a task on time, not one time the entire year.
Okay. That's really helpful. And Dr. Stevens, I know you mentioned that you have a history with this, and I'll come to you in just a second. But Crystal, if you're okay, I know that it took you a little bit of time in your school years to kind of figure out how you kind of got a specific way where you learned best, and you kind of lived this out in your own life as a student. Can you share that with us and what that experience was like for you?
Yeah. And I shared this in the Christian Leader, what I sent there as well, that I learned in college, prepping to take teacher ed classes, that there are different learning styles, and that each learner, there may be more now, but that at the time that I was learning this, probably 25 or so years ago, each learner falls into basically one of three categories predominantly. Either they're a visual learner, so they learn by seeing, they're an auditory learner, and they learn by listening, or they're a kinesthetic learner, they learn by doing. And I realized really quickly that I'm a pretty strong kinesthetic learner, but so much of education is either auditory, like lecture style college classes, or it's visual and auditory. So a kinesthetic learner like me was really, really struggling, especially math. Science was okay if we were doing a lab, but like school was genuinely hard for me. I really, really had to try. I really had to push myself until I learned that. And then my college profs at Fresno Pacific were so great about just being like, what do you need to do? And so I figured out that coloring, either taking notes through coloring or even just bringing like coloring book to class, and crocheting. I just brought crocheting to lecture style classes, and my profs were so accepting of that. And for the first time in my life, I got straight A's. And it was so gratifying to be like, I figured myself out. And so now, even like in conversations like this, I'm putting on lotion, I'm tidying things on my desk because, and Sunday morning sermon, when I've got my earbuds in, I'm doing dishes, I'm folding laundry, I'm out in the garden. Because I'm going to learn those listening things best if my mind is busy listening while my body is doing something else. Does that make sense? And a lot of kids actually fall into the kinesthetic category too. I'm sure Vicki and Dave can agree with that.
Well, and I think historically, like if we were to go back, 20, 30 years ago, if we saw kids in class who were fidgeting or coloring or, messing with their shoes or poking at the person in front of them, like they were kind of scolded as being disruptive, and no, you need to stop and you need to pay
if you were
attention,
to
be
ask
quiet.
that child, did you hear what I just said? Or like, what was that story I just told? They often can tell you the gist of what you just said while they were relacing their shoes.
Right. So Dr. Stevens, can you talk about that a little bit? I don't know if that was your experience, but even just the historical, maybe how things were, 20, 30 years ago and what we've learned since then. Can you kind of fill some of those gaps for us?
Yeah, well, my personal experience is very much like Crystal. I'm a kinesthetic learner and visual, and I had to eke my way through school. School was not designed for kids like me. Someone who couldn't sit still for more than 3 minutes, couldn't listen to somebody talking about anything for more than 5 minutes. It was just an absolute nightmare trying to make it through school. In fact, if I didn't play sports, I probably wouldn't have been. I probably never would have graduated. And it was that way for me all the way through my doctoral program, because I just had trouble sitting and listening to anybody speak. And so I would just kind of zone out, do other things, and then learn it on my own at home because I could read in my own peaceful, quiet place. But I don't think it's changed a whole lot. It is changing. I do see some changes. So in classrooms that I visit, mostly in high schools, it drives me nuts to see a teacher just standing up front talking for 45 minutes and then assigning homework, because that's not how we learn. We just know that that's not how humans learn best.
Right.
We need to do stuff. We need to interact with each other. We need to be able to ask questions. And I think that one of the things that I try to encourage teachers to do is change your whole modality, change your frame of mind about learning in the classroom and who we are as teachers. Everything from allowing students to interrupt when they don't understand something instead of taking offense to it. If a student has a question, because they should be able to ask good questions, they should be able to get clarity on anything that we're talking about. They should be able to be making predictions. There's all kinds of things that should be going on that is an interaction between each other and the teacher. So it becomes more like a laboratory of learning rather than these are my pearls of wisdom, catch them as they drop off my lips, and then here's 35 problems to do for homework tonight. Yeah. And then every high school teacher has an hour of homework, so they're supposed to get 8 hours of homework done at night. I just think it all needs to be rethought, but that's systemic. That comes from the top down, and it's a very difficult thing to actually make even slight changes in districts, because it starts with the superintendent and trickles down from there. It's hard. It's just one of those things that as teachers, that's what you're up against. And then related to what we've already said, teachers have to be so creative and adaptive when you've got so many different kinds of learners in one environment, and some need structures, some don't work well in structures. So how's a teacher, do you figure all that stuff out? Yes. So teaching's a very difficult job these days. Yes. As it always has been, but I think it's more difficult now with all of the distractions and all of the different kinds of kids we have in our classrooms.
Yes. My wife's a teacher and she would agree with that. I'm sure Mickey would agree with that too. We'll maybe get to that in just a second. I want to, for our listeners, the three of you guys did a great job. You got some really practical things that we can implement in our classrooms or our homes or whatever. We'll get to that in just a second. But I'm kind of curious, maybe this would be Dr. Stevens and Mickey, if you could both chime in a little bit. We can't go too far into this because I wouldn't understand it, but can you give us can we nerd out just a little bit on the science and the body and the brain, and help us again on a layer that our people like me can understand. What's going on in our brains that makes some of these changes happen in some kids and not some others? What are the brain things or the chemical things, or give us just a kind of a basic overview of what's going on here.
So this happens to be something I get really nerdy about because I work with so many kids who experience this. There's some really fascinating research happening right now about the impact on our pleasure and reward centers and those neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin. And our task initiation and ability to stay with a task is largely related to the amount of dopamine that our brain is willing to provide for us to sustain our focus and attention and our enjoyment. We are much more likely to do things that we're enjoying doing, and our brain is kind of in charge of whether or not we feel pleasure about something. So you can watch kiddos a lot with functional MRI machines and those sort of brain imaging that we can do now. And the actual structures in their brains respond very differently to stimulus in an ADHD brain than it would in a non-ADHD brain. So something incredibly fascinating for us scientifically right now is that we can see the structural differences in the brains. We know this is a biological happening. This isn't just behavior anymore. And it never was, but like we no longer have the excuse for just calling it a behavior issue. So we get to really see how different circuits light up and different stimulus is processed. There's a tremendous amount of research being done about our visual cortex and the ways that our eyes actually perceive and process stimulus lights up different parts of our brain that contributes to, again, that pleasure and reward and dopamine center. And if we're just not getting those neurotransmitters like we need, then we don't have the sustained attention and focus and ability to manage time and read social cues. So the research that's happening right now surrounding ADHD and this kind of neurodivergence is incredibly promising for how we approach it and how we talk about it and how we help to treat it.
Yeah. And Dr. Stevens, the trauma part of it, I think that might surprise some people that trauma could cause some of these kinds of things. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, well, and first to kind of piggyback on the dopamine thing, now what is really cool about learning and what we've kind of learned ourselves about how children learn best is that exploration and discovery is amazing when a teacher can use that as a tool, because when a kid actually gets to explore something and figure something out on their own or with a little bit of coaching from a teacher or from a peer, and they make that discovery by themselves, something just goes off in the brain that feels good. There's a dopamine rush. And like John Medina would say, that's actually similar to the same thing that happens when someone takes cocaine. And so what happens is if you can continue to put that child in that situation where they're incrementally making their own discoveries, they get addicted to it. They get addicted to learning. And so if that's your mindset as a teacher, that you can help somebody become a lifelong learning through addiction to learning and that love for that feeling when they make discoveries, you can change everything about the classroom environment. Wow. And I learned that by accident before I didn't know a thing about neuroscience. I had a kid in my first math high school class who obviously never did well in math because he was working at about a fifth grade level. First quiz, first week, first year as a teacher, I gave a quiz and he was embarrassed. He was just blushing. He couldn't make eye contact with me. And I said, Miguel, what in the world? And you could just tell, shame. I just saw it on his face. He was done. He was getting ready to check out because this was his experience with math his whole life. And I said, I don't know what I did, but I'll figure out how I can help you understand this. I failed you this week. And something kind of went off and he thought I was mocking him a little bit. And I said, go talk to Cynthia in the back. She's figured this out. So he goes back and talks to Cynthia and he comes back and he goes, Mr. Stevens, all you had to do is this, this, and this. And I was like, Cynthia, you're a genius. You should be teaching this class. And so I said, Miguel, go over and change the score in your grade book, because I kept my grade book on my desk. And so he went over and he put an A over his F. And I'll never forget it because he comes walking back to his desk going, first A ever. First, he was like so excited that he got an A in math. And that changed my whole philosophy of grading and incremental learning, because I had to teach him at a fifth grade level. He had to actually build that foundation and start building on it. And through working on his own stuff and working with other peers and figuring stuff out on his own, he incrementally started loving it. He started coming into my classroom at recess because he wanted to work on stuff and talk to me about how he'd figured out his own stuff. And so I didn't even understand the neuroscience behind it. It was just common sense to me that that's how we learn as humans. And so that kind of changed everything for me and got me excited about studying the neuroscience behind it. And so that's the exciting thing about learning. The sad thing is when you do introduce trauma, it does affect the brain in ways that I think teachers need to understand. One small thing is that if we took the hippocampus out of a student with a trauma background, they're typically about 30% smaller than a healthy hippocampus. And in brain science, we know how important the hippocampus is to actually transferring any new knowledge into long-term knowledge. And so those kids come in with 3 strikes against them before they even get to the classroom.
Yeah.
So it's not because they're knuckleheads. It's not because they're lazy. It's not because we're just not teaching to their level because we don't understand the brains that they've got in their head and what we have to work with as teachers. So trauma does have a physical effect on the brain. Developmentally, the brain just doesn't develop at the same pace as a healthy brain. And so those students really do have strikes against them before they ever even get to school. And I think just knowing little facts like that helps teachers empathize, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And I'm going to piggyback on that and add that we know that their hippocampus is smaller, and we also know that their amygdala, which is in charge of survival and that fight or flight instinct, tends to be larger. And so they have a brain with centers for retaining information and learning that is smaller, that also has a hyperactive focus on keeping them alive and scanning for threats. And it really does just set them up for all kinds of challenges in learning because they don't feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah. That's huge. Yeah. And those are things that I think, again, it's really important for all of us to know and understand and have empathy. Like you just said, Dr. Stevens, if you're a parent or a teacher, just knowing this, I think is super, super important. So I want to spend a lot of time talking about some of the practical stuff about like what we can do with this information. But one more thing, and I'm kind of going backwards a little bit, so sorry for rewinding a little bit, but so we kind of mentioned ADD, attention deficit disorder, ADHD. Really quickly, can we just define that and maybe differentiate between ADD and ADHD? Because I think it might be helpful to clarify that a little bit.
Well, Mickey, you might be able to add more context to this, but I think when you add the H to ADD, you're adding impulsivity and lack of executive control. It's not just flying around the class and being hyperactive. It just kind of includes that real lack of control because the executive centers in the brain aren't functioning properly.
A lot of the times anymore, diagnostically, we're using those terms interchangeably. We're using ADHD and ADD almost the same. Really, the distinction there is that hyperactivity piece, that's the H. And what we see a lot of, Matt, like Dr. Stevens says, is the impulse control. It's that inhibitory control. It's very much that driven by a motor all the time, and not just in behaviors, but also in thoughts, in attention, in lack of ability to read a room or understand a social cue or interpersonal relationships. So we're just seeing a lot of that. A kiddo who's from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next constantly, and they're just driven by that motor. Whereas our ADD presentations are a little more reserved. You don't see the hyperactivity piece, but you certainly would see a quieter lack of attention or inability to sustain attention and complete a task. It's not the kid climbing the walls. It's more the kid sitting at the back of the room zoned out who also didn't hear anything you said and cannot interact with their peers effectively.
Mm-hmm.
They just aren't drawing the attention to themselves.
Yes. Okay. No, that's good.
And those students with ADD actually tend to fall through the cracks because they go unnoticed because they're compliant. They're not causing problems in the classroom. And so a lot of teachers just let it go or don't notice it at all.
Yeah. That's good.
I would say girls particularly fall into that category where, because the presentation of ADHD and ADD are so different in our female students, you almost always will miss that presentation in a girl. I have friends who are in their 40s and were not diagnosed until they were in college. Mm-hmm. And finally someone said, "Oh, I think that your struggles with school are actually this. Because for girls, as long as, they tend to be quiet and compliant and not draw a lot of attention to themselves anyway. And that very, very much falls through the cracks in our education system.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Okay, well, one thing I want to spend some time on, which I think is really interesting. So for the Christian leader, Lacey asked, I think all three of you, for some tips for parents or teachers or church leaders of how to deal with kids who have some of these situations or these diagnoses. And to my knowledge, the three of you didn't correspond ahead of time, but all three of you give very similar answers, which I think is a good sign. I think you guys are on the same page, which is awesome. And one thing that I think is maybe helpful, I kind of want to speak a little bit to, the church volunteer who helps out on Wednesday nights, or the parent who maybe doesn't know all the medical jargon and stuff, or the teacher who has, like Mickey has hundreds of students. A lot of teachers today have a classroom that's way too full, and some of their kids may have some of these symptoms or these behaviors, but they haven't been diagnosed. And so I kind of want to get a big picture if for ADD, ADHD, neurotypical spectrum. It sounds, again, I'm a normal layperson who doesn't know anything, but it sounds to me like there's kind of some common things that are probably good for all of those kids if they're somewhere in one of those backgrounds or one of those spectrums, that it's helpful for any kid who's got any of those. So first of all, is that true, or are there some things we need to be careful about before we generalize too much?
I would say it's hard to generalize just because there is no Band-Aid or one-size-fits-all every kid. And I think that's the most important thing for any of us as a leader, teacher, pastor, is to really know your person and know what works. Everything from how they co-regulate with you to how do they learn best, what kind of structure they need, what kind of freedom do they need. It's really, it's so individual that it makes it hard, because so many teachers will call me and say, what should I do with this kid? And I'll say, I have no idea. I'd have to spend a month to 3 months to even know that kid well enough to even be creative with supports and ideas that I might have for this kid. So I think in a way, it's hard to generalize, but I think we can all come up with some general things that we've seen work and that we now have been tried, true, and tested in the field. But just to kind of answer that question, I think it's important for people to know that there are no Band-Aids. It's really up to us having the knowledge and the patience and the love for a person to actually get to know them well enough to help design whatever it is that we need to do as a team. Sometimes that includes the other person. A lot of times it includes the other person helping us come up with that.
Yes. That's good. I appreciate you saying that. Crystal, maybe let me start with you. Just maybe, I don't know if this would be more practical from your teacher experience or your church experience, but you send in a handful of things that, again, I think is good advice for any teacher working with kids, really of any background, but maybe especially some of these kids. So can you walk through some of those, like fidgets, or I think it was interesting, you mentioned subtitles, or can you just kind of walk through some of those things that are kind of easy first things that people can start implementing?
Yeah, so I would say, and again, like David said, generalizing is tough, but what you could say from one teacher to another, a rule of thumb could be try not to just use one learning style at a time. So for example, and parents, you can do this at home too. If you're watching a movie at home as a family, put on the subtitles. So then actually you're actually hitting all three learning styles at the same time. Even in kids' church on a Sunday, depending on what video clip you're showing, show video clip to the Sunday morning teachers. There's so many great Bible story resources online. Email me at Crystal@Bethany-Fresno. I can recommend them to you, but put on subtitles when you're showing videos. Another thing I would recommend is I don't just crack open the Bible and read that Bible story out loud. My children are looking it up in the Bible. So there's my kinesthetic learners. Then I'm also putting the exact same Bible text on the screen. And I'm also putting pictures beside every text. So like this week, we're going to do John 20, where Thomas needs to actually touch Jesus. There's amazing artwork from 2,000 years worth of artists that are creating this beautiful picture. So we're going to have it on the screen. We're going to have it in our paper Bibles in front of us. We're going to have painting as well for each slide. And probably teachers only put 2 or 3 verses on the slide and then clicked the next slide. Another thing that's great for some of these learners is to give them a job. So often my neurodivergent friends are the best at running my PowerPoints. And they take turns. They get to come up and click the next arrow, and they're locked in because they've got it right in front of them. It's like a little screen just for them.
Yeah.
And then also I would say teachers, a great skill for you to just get in the habit of doing is change your tone of voice. I just did it really well. So when you really want kids to lock in, lean in, lower your voice, slow down, change the tone. Also, if you're trying to get their attention, instead of saying or raising your voice, can you sing it? Can you sing what you need them to hear you say? Or can we do if you can hear me, give me a snap, snap. Or if you can hear me, give me a... So we're engaging different parts of their body. Those are just a couple classroom things. I could go all day with classroom tips, but I want to hear from the others too.
Oh, that's so good. And again, I want to be careful because to me, all those things you just said are just signs of a good teacher, good communicator, regardless of the student's background and ability. I think that's brilliant. I could see how it would be extra helpful for some of these kids. So Mickey and Dr. Stevens, you both, in your responses, talked about co-regulating. And I think that's something that I think would be good to unpack a little bit. So Mickey, I'll start with you this time. Can you expand what does that mean and how can we implement that in classroom settings?
And so really simply put, co-regulating, co means with, we are regulating with another human. We especially see that a lot in kids, but honestly, adults do that too. Adults regulate. Our nervous system is regulated by the other adults in our presence. So what that looks like kind of practically, especially in a classroom, in a church, those sorts of settings, is that the best that we can as adults, we are responsible for our own wellness and our own regulation. If we wake up 5 minutes before we need to leave for school or work or church to come teach Sunday school, and we come busting in the door and we haven't reviewed our materials and we aren't prepared for the day and we come in frazzled and overwhelmed and overstimulated already, we are going to create that reaction in every single person that we encounter. We are going to overstimulate, overwhelm them because we are so dysregulated. So co-regulation means me first. It means that I show up present and attuned and able to connect with the people I'm going to be around in a way that fosters healthy attachments and success for them.
Yeah. And I would add to that, you know, God created us with mirror neurons for a reason. And it's a big part of that is for our own protection. So that because we have mirror neurons, we can feel what other people are feeling based on their face, their voice, their body language. So if we do come in dysregulated, students already know that it doesn't matter what comes out of our mouth. So if we're working with a student who's got trauma in their past and they see a certain look or hear a certain voice, you're going to cause trauma because they won't feel safe. So, and this is particularly with male teachers, I think they need to be really careful with how they use vocal tones because the parts of the inner ear really react and send signals to the brain that they're not safe if they hear deep, male, aggressive type of tones. So it's just the way we're built. We are built for safety and survival. God has a perfect design for this, and trauma screws up that design by putting, because survivors of trauma actually live in a dysregulated state most of their lives. It's hard to get out of that, which is why it takes somebody that loves them enough to help them feel safe and then intentionally will co-regulate with them to not react, to not be reactive to their outbursts or their temper or whatever they're doing, but to keep ourselves in that state where we can actually be that calming influence. Because, you know, Perry said you can't do anything with a kid who's just done something wrong or had an outburst or disrupted a lesson until you have helped that kid regulate so that you can actually relate to them. And then you can start working on the problem. Then you can start actually having a rational conversation with someone who's gotten into the right state. So it's co-regulation is actually really important in a classroom, but I think a lot of teachers aren't really even self-aware of how much their presence affects everybody in a classroom before they even say a word.
Yeah. Yeah. That's huge. Yeah. And speaking of of course, this is great advice for parents too. Classroom, we're talking about classroom, but yeah, parents for sure. And Crystal, I think all three of you also mentioned the importance of routine. And I think this might be helpful, again, as a parent or even just an adult in the world today. Can you talk a little bit about routine and anything else you want to add to this conversation, Crystal?
Yeah, I was going to just tag on to what Mickey and David said. Some advice that I give to younger teachers, I just gave this advice to my nephew who is a substitute teacher, is don't have buttons. And one of you already mentioned this idea of just don't be easily offended. It's basically that same concept. Read Brant Hanson's book. But basically, don't, your students should never know what your button is, right? They should never know if I do this one thing, it's going to really make Pastor Crystal mad, right? They should never know that. And really shouldn't have that. Like, come into your teaching environment as this unoffendable person that can just accept and love unconditionally and be ready to express the joy and the peace of Christ. Because if your students know that you have these hot spots, they might use them against you, or they're not going to feel safe. They're not going to feel secure with you. So just don't have buttons. Whether you're a public school classroom teacher or you're a church volunteer, no buttons.
You make it sound so
routine.
easy, Crystal. Just be perfectly calm all the time. That's all.
Listen, I'm 43 and I'm still working on this. But routine, yes, I agree. I think routine also can kind of tag onto, there was the great question, how can parents reduce power struggles at home? That was when I was really, routine is a great way to reduce power struggles either in the classroom or at home. Something that my husband and I implement both at home, but also in our teaching, in our classrooms, is give them opportunities to manage their free will. That's a gift that God gave to all of us. Free will, free agency, choices. So things like this morning, my kids have a chore chart, so it rotates. They're not getting the same exact chores every day of their life. They're rotating. It's my 16-year-old's job to unload the dishwasher. So this morning, the dishwasher's clean, it's open, everything's dried out. So I said, hey, that just needs to be unloaded before dinner tonight. And it'll happen. She's got all day to do it. She can do it with earbuds in. She can do it now before she goes to school. She can do it when she gets home from school. She has free agency and free will, and she manages herself. So she can unload it whenever she wants to. Same with Saturday chores. Those need to happen by Saturday at dinner time. But you have all week to go outside and clean the spider webs or to wipe down the bathroom counters. You're choosing when you do that. In the same way, when my husband gets in a power struggle with a student in his classroom, he's smart enough to avoid those power struggles. But when there's a student that won't put their phone away, then he's going to give a choice. You can choose to put it away now, or I can call campus safety and they can come in and confiscate your phone and take it to their office. You choose. And I think, God gave us the gift of free will, intending for us to learn how to manage it. So I think as teachers and parents, as we can help coach and provide those opportunities with some safe choices, don't give a choice that you would be okay with your child or your student doing. Like, you can either unload the dishwasher before dinner, or you can just spend the whole day in your room on your screen. Don't give those choices. Give the choices that you're okay with happening in your home. And the Lord does the same way throughout the Bible with us as well.
It's funny that you also mentioned buttons, because I think for me personally, that's easier with my students than it is with my own kids. My kids do know my buttons. But one button I had early in my teaching career was just getting interrupted when I was in the middle of what I thought was a really important thought. And it would bug me because if I got interrupted and had to address it, I couldn't remember what the heck I was talking about, and I couldn't ever get back to it. And so what I started doing was I would just say, okay, sounds like you're starting to get bored and I'm starting to bore myself. Why don't we just stop and play a quick 2-minute game? And so then after a while, I actually put that into my game plan every 10 to 15 minutes, just put some activity that just broke it up a little bit. And I couldn't do it every time because there are some kids that just need that train of thought to keep going. But then there are some that just need that broken up for them so that they can wiggle, move around. I think for a lot of kids, movement is so important. And probably for every kid, movement is so important. And that's important to me because I couldn't stop moving. I was always moving. And for me, even in church, ask my wife, she'll tell me I'm the worst person to sit in church with because 5 minutes in, I'm fidgety, I'm looking for something to do. I'm thinking about washing my car. I'm the worst. And she won't even let me sit next to my own kids because I distract them. And she'll elbow me and ask me to be quiet. And so I think just as teachers, and pastors, anybody that's working with groups of people just kind of needs to remember that we have our norms. And some people don't fit those norms, and we have to be creative about how we work around what's always been seen as good was just sitting quietly for 45 minutes in the classroom. But that's not the way people learn anymore. We've kind of evolved into people that need action, need movement, need interaction with each other.
This shows how mischievous I was, but I almost wanted to interrupt you there, Dr. Stevens, just to see what would happen if I interrupted.
You're as tempting, but you should have. But the only problem is we can't play a game real quick, and so I never would remember what we were talking about.
David, you also, when you get interrupted, you could turn to one of them and be like, what was I just saying? Because I can't remember. And one of your students will remember exactly where you are.
Okay, I want to ask one more really practical question I think a lot of people have asked, and I've got one more thing to wrap up with. Our time is going really fast. I love this topic, but one thing I've heard people say is, how do I know the can't versus won't discussion? Some kids just can't do certain things, and some kids just won't do certain things. And does it matter, or how do we know what they're capable of? Or what if we know someone's capable, but they're just not willing to do what we want them to do in whatever circumstance we're in? So can we just spend a couple minutes on that? Because I think, again, in the real world we live in, I think a lot of people wrestle with that. So
I think biologically, there isn't a meaningful distinction between can't and won't. If our brain won't give us the dopamine and won't give us those excitatory chemicals, then it does not matter if we can't or we won't.
Okay.
So in a practical sense, I'm going to say, let's assume that it's can't. Let's always go into it assuming the positive about our kids, our own kids, our classroom kids, our friends, our neighbors. Let's always go into it assuming the positive, that they really deeply want to do the very best that they can, that they are doing the very best that they can with the skills and abilities that they have access to at the moment. So I'm going to always say, let's assume can't focus. And then it's our job as the adult, as the regulated person in the room, to inspire that motivation, to help excite them about the things that we're putting before them, to get them somehow to buy in and be invested. And that really becomes a task for us as the adult in the room to figure out what it is that gets them excited about the thing that we're putting before them to do. Even like my own kids, my kids don't want to clean their room. My kids don't want to do their chores. Right. And so it becomes my job as the adult, as their mom, to incentivize and motivate and encourage and to teach and model for them what it looks like to bear a load and bear a responsibility and have meaningful tasks and purpose in a family and in a home and in a community. And so I'm going to always assume that it's a matter of can't and that we can encourage.
Yeah, and I'd like to piggyback on that because I agree 100% that, if we assume that they won't focus, or it implies that they're being defiant or lazy. And that usually leads to ridicule or discipline. Mm-hmm. And if a student can't, and they're getting ridiculed and disciplined for something that they can't do, we just make the problem worse because they're going to tune out. You've broken the relationship. You've broken any desire or ability to learn, do something new, be creative. It's just, I really like what Mickey just said, because I think that and that's hard with my own kids, because I agree with everything she just said. Is it's kind of on me as the parent to find things that motivate my kids when they don't want to do something, or when I suspect that they won't focus or won't try at something. It's kind of on me as the adult to actually do what I can to help out with that and coach them. And then when they do it, celebrate it. And don't you see how good this feels to have accomplished that? Even cleaning your room. Doesn't it feel good to have a clean room? Mm-hmm. It was worth all that work. But just let it go and ignore it. And that kind of goes back to something else I wrote. Like every time a kid makes a mistake, whether it's at church, school, home, celebrate those mistakes as opportunities to learn something new. That I, as your dad, get to watch you learn this. That's going to be so fun for me, and it's going to be so fun for you to actually learn it. Just keep working. maybe give a few ideas, but then let them struggle with it and then celebrate the hard work they did.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Crystal, I want to invite you to speak into that, but I was actually going to finish with you, Crystal, because we're all believers here, but you're a pastor. And so I want to lean into that a little bit. And as Christian leaders, can you talk a little bit about the pastoral, the biblical, the Christian responsibility behind this? Because I think that's an important thing I want to touch on before we wrap up here.
Yeah, I agree with everything. Mickey's answer was actually really similar to what I had written down for this. And I think we as Christians, we can pray. We can pray silently in those moments. We can pray out loud in those moments. If you're another volunteer or another parent or another adult in that room watching something like that happen, please pray. My volunteers are so great about that when they're seeing a child shutting down. I've got one of them in particular that I know she's working hard in prayer for those kids during kids' church. I think praying for the hearts of children, praying for their minds. Just even on the drive to church this morning, I was just praying for my family of 5 that we all would just be convicted where there's sin in our lives. Just kind of as a broad spectrum kind of spring cleaning, I think it can't be discounted how important your prayers are, either for the children in your classroom, the learners in your classroom, college, or Mickey said, clear up to age 68. We can pray for them. So often I'll ask when I'm praying for someone, I'll just ask, Holy Spirit, put on my heart the things that you want me to pray for this person, because he knows their needs. He knows how their brain works. He knows what divergent path their brain might take that I don't even understand. And the Holy Spirit will give me creative ideas or ways to engage, or like Nikki said, ways to inspire. And all good ideas come from the Lord. All ways to connect, all unity, all healing, all that feeling of safety that David was talking about, that all comes from the Lord. And so just praying that the Spirit would give us those things and guide us in those ways so that we can be our bridge for these children, young and old.
Totally agree. Well, you guys, we've gone over time. I've got like 8 more questions I wish we had time for. Well, maybe I have to do a part 2 because I think this is such an interesting and such an important topic. But we'll kind of wrap things up for now. But guys, thank you so much for your time today, for your heart and your passion for this. I think all 3 of you have very important jobs, and I'm just so grateful we have people like you speaking into this. So listeners, make sure you check out the article from the Christian Leader. If you don't get the print edition, it'll be online here soon. So any kind of closing thoughts before we wrap up, guys? Anything else really important I didn't hit?
No, I think that was fun. I appreciate you having us on.
All right. Well, thanks to all 3 of you. We'll do this again sometime. Thanks for being here.
Looking for your next ministry opportunity or know someone who is? The USMB jobs page is one of the best places to discover openings in Mennonite Brethren churches and ministries across the country. Whether you're exploring a new calling or searching for a pastor, worship leader, youth minister, or other ministry role, you'll find opportunities from churches actively looking for leaders. Visit usmb.org/jobs to browse current openings. Again, that's usmb.org/jobs. Your next ministry opportunity could be just a click away.
Well, that was a fantastic conversation and such an important topic. I think a great way to kick off this new chapter of the Christian Leader podcast. So once again, many thanks to David, Mickey, and Crystal for joining us today. Lots of really good, helpful, practical stuff there for all of us, really. So thanks again to all of you. And like we mentioned a few times now, there's much more in the new issue of the Christian Leader magazine. So whenever you get it in your mailbox, make sure that you check out that piece from those 3. Or, of course, you can also check out christianleadermag.com, and it'll be posted online here soon. So be sure to keep an eye on that page as well. And hey, I hope you can tell we are excited about this new season of the podcast. And I hope you are too. So I know this is kind of cringy, kind of eye-rolly, but we really would love your help. Help us spread the word. Do all the things. Write a review wherever you're listening. Give us 5 stars. Share it on social media. Text a link. Smash the like button. I don't know. Do whatever you can to help us spread the word. We want more and more people to discover the show and the great content that we're working to provide. So we'd love your help, especially as we kind of launch this new season of the podcast. And speaking of that, I'll give you just a quick little teaser for next week. We've got a really fun episode next time. I don't think I want to give too much away, but if you grew up listening to CCM music, don't miss this one. We've got a special guest, a really cool story, someone that honestly I never thought I'd have the chance to interview, but I did, and it was very fun. So I hope you consider yourself intrigued. Make sure you join us for the next episode. Okay, with that, we'll wrap up the very first episode of the Christian Leader Podcast. Thanks again so much for being here today. Hope you have a great week, and we'll see you again real soon.